Hi, I'm Joe Esposito. I'll be the moderator today. I'm senior partner with Clarke and Esposito. And what I'd like to do is to ask my illustrious panelists here to introduce themselves. So why don't we start on that end, please? Well, we're going to start on this end. Oh, no, I'm sorry.
I'm holding forth.
I mistook the way it was set up. Yeah. I'm sorry.
We like to keep people on their toes. My name is Rebecca Seger. I'm the Vice President for Institutional Participation and Strategic Partnerships with Ithaca.
I'm Amy Pawlowski. I'm the Deputy Director of OhioLINK.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Lopes. I'm the Vice President for Institutional Sales for the Americas at SpringerNature.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mihoko Hosoi, Associate Dean for Collections, Research, and Scholarly Communications at Penn State University Libraries, my new title.
So the way we have this set up is I have a series of questions that I'll be asking the panel. We will be reserving some time at the end for questions from the floor. Note that there is a microphone up front. You have to use the microphone. They're going to be recording this. You must use the microphone. The first person to ask a question has to turn the microphone on. Remember that. That's important. So I wanted to have the panel. I'm going to turn to the panelists now to give us a little bit of background. And this time we're going to start in the proper order as it's on the slide. And I apologize for that mistake before.
So I started my Penn State position on October 1st. So it's only been 1 month. So as you might know, I previously worked at the California Digital Library. So I was there until September. So it's been a transformational experience for me. It's such a different place at Penn State, but it's been wonderful. So at Penn State, we have both title by title and journal package agreements. And in terms of open access initiatives, as you might know, Penn State recently got a faculty endorsement on faculty senate endorsement on open access policy. So we're promoting green open access and encouraging our faculty to deposit accepted manuscript into institutional repository. And also we invest in a variety of gold OA, but mostly crowdfunding models. We've also considered a transformative agreement. However, it hasn't worked out mostly because of financial and other concerns.
So I've been with SpringerNature for close to 9 years. I've been with other publishers before, so I've been in the industry for just over 20. And my background is actually not in sales. It's actually closer to the academia than anything else. I almost became an academic. I have a PhD in quantitative methods, which most of the time does serve me for absolutely nothing. But I'm here representing SpringerNature. As I'm sure most of you know, we are a leader in open access. We have been quite likely the most active player when it comes to open access agreements. We've been doing them for a number of years, and open access is something that we're very invested and fully supportive of. But of course, in the world that we live, we still very much work with big deals, and we have a variety of offers for our customers. So it is an interesting world right now. And it is one that we are very positive about, and we're very excited to explore the different options for the future.
Hello, everyone. As Deputy Director of OhioLINK, which is a consortium of 118 libraries at 89 institutions of higher education, plus the State Library of Ohio and the Cleveland Clinic, as Deputy Director, I manage the organization's operations and am responsible for content negotiations. OhioLINK has a very long history of e-journal deals, both from large publishers, Springer, Oxford, Cambridge, down to smaller, medium-sized societies and smaller societies such as ACS and ACM. And as the advent of OA transformative deals in Europe and more recently in the US, we've been taking a closer look at how OA would affect our large journal packages in a few different ways. The first is funding. What would an OA deal look like for an organization whose membership spans a spectrum in terms of research output? So what I mean by that is with OhioLINK, we have the Ohio State University, a few other R1s. We have a bunch of R2s and R3s, public institutions, pretty much all independent independent nonprofit colleges and universities across the state of Ohio and the community colleges down to the Athenaeum of Ohio. We have this broad spectrum of membership. So what does that mean to us in terms of their research output, tracking, all of that? And then how would we as a group then shift our cost distribution model, or should we, or would we, and what would that look like to accommodate that spectrum? Thirdly is operational aspects, and I don't think I've heard a lot about this at this conference here today, but it's those, as operations for OhioLINK, I really tend to think about operational costs and what you might consider hidden costs. So if we were to approach any sort of project, do we need to staff up at any level? Do I have to ask my institutions to do additional work, and does that additional work mean that they potentially would have to staff up or work with different departments across their institution?
So my name is Rebecca Seger, as I mentioned. So like Mihoko, I just recently changed positions, but for the last almost 20 years, I worked for Oxford University Press in the role of Senior Director for Institutional Sales for the Americas. And a large part of my work over the last decade or so was around journals and business models. And OUP is still there, is predominantly a society publisher with over 70% of their journals owned by societies, which in and of itself presented a lot of challenges. But we worked collaboratively with the library community and particularly consortia to find sustainable pricing models to enable societies to stay in a not-for-profit environment while supporting the challenging demands globally for the shift to open. And this could be particularly challenging in an humanities and social science environment where there isn't as much money to publish. And when there is a bigger publishing component to what you're producing, with the vastly longer articles and even more publishing process around them. And OUP entered into numerous read and publish agreements over the last year or two, predominantly in Europe, where there are central research funding bodies that simplify the process, which is not something that's possible in the less autonomous world of licensing in North America. But moving towards open and a sustainable environment to ensure that quality of content remains exceptional is a challenge, especially in that nonprofit environment and in fields that don't have the funding or resources to support publication, where author pays is not an option. So those are the things that we were challenged with and talking about continually with the community.
Okay, so I'm going to be asking a few questions of our panel. The first question is the basic one that we have to really agree on, and that is, what is the big deal? How do you define it, and are there variations? Anybody want to take that on?
Okay, so if we're looking for a consensus, it might be a bit difficult. I think probably the most consistent thing about big deals is that not two big deals are alike. They tend to vary by publisher, they vary by customer, they vary if it's an individual institution, if it's a consortia. You have big deals where you get access to additional content, where you pay for it. Some you don't pay for it. Some you get archival rights, some you do not. The variations just continue. To me, if I wanted to define what a big deal is, it probably would consist of three important key elements. It would be an agreement that provides significant additional content to the institution or the consortia. It would be a deal that would be a multi-year agreement, and you would have a price cap. And I focus on those three because I think it's really important. The first one, because it really brings us back to the original idea of the big deal, what it was made for. It was to provide dissemination of content and to even make sure that those institutions that really couldn't afford access to a large number of articles and journals could actually afford it now and level the playing field. And that was really important. For the large institutions, the important thing was to really underpin their spend and make sure that they could control their costs. So that's why it was important that it was a multi-year deal and that it was with a price increase that they knew if it was sustainable or not. So that is how I define it. But I think every single person, be it on the consortium, institutional level, or even at different publishers, have a very different idea of what a big deal looks like.
Right, I think the community perhaps at this stage has a tendency to simplify or try to make the big deal one simple thing, and that is not. OhioLINK was the inventor of the big deal. I was not there at the time. That was Tom Sanville. But as I look at what we call a big deal within OhioLINK, it is not every journal from the publisher that we have a deal with. We have carved some of our quote-unquote big deals down to really the titles that my community has deemed necessary for their institution. So I wanted to point that out. I also want to point out the difference between a consortial big deal and its implications, pluses and minuses, versus an individual institution big deal, and how those, the aspects of either of those play out as far as pricing and a workload at the consortial versus the individual institution level.
So when I think about big deal, I think of it as a package, and there are many different packages. Traditional package might include a core portion based on our historical sub plus top-up content. Another model might be a database model. Another is a journal plus something different, something like analytical tools and so forth. I also think that something common among these things is that it's usually on a single publisher contract. So that's another thing I think of.
I definitely don't have too much to add to that, but I guess from my perspective, I always thought of the big deal as a business model. That's what it was, and it could be anything within that. But that in theory, it had benefits for everyone involved. It had benefits for the library, the publisher, and the end user. That it was simplified acquisitions model. You didn't have to manage 2,000 journals individually. You got benefits by getting content that you might not have had access to in a consortia world. The smaller members could benefit from the investment in the bigger, by the bigger libraries, the R1s, and that that end users benefited by access. And the big deal was very much in line with the mission of Oxford University Press, which was to get the content out as widely as possible in a sustainable model. So that's how we viewed it and thought of how we crafted a big deal.
Is your organization currently involved with a big deal, whether you're on the library side or the publisher side?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, we have a few.
Okay.
That went quick.
Well, people needed to know. Do you believe that a comprehensive open access environment is inevitable for academic publishing?
Marie's handing me the microphone for those of you that were at the session. I was on the panel prior to this. I am pessimistic about a true full flip to open access, and there's many, many reasons, and I could go on and on for hours really about this. But for us at OhioLINK, and Jason, thank you for being here again. I would like to point out Jason Jason Price's presentation from yesterday, in which he was talking about what he has coined the funding gap, and that is a very true reality for consortia. And as Jason was presenting this, I heard people talking about, oh, this challenge for consortia. However, that funding gap within a consortia very much reflects what the whole entire universe of publishing looks like for one particular institution. So it's not just what's happening in consortia. That is a true reflection of expand that, and that's what's going to happen. And that funding gap is with the models that are currently being presented. If it costs X to produce that content, my output at OhioLINK would fall. The cost would fall on 7 or so institutions, and I have a long tail of institutions that hardly do any publishing, 1 or 2 article over 3 years, in which they, in theory, would get that content for free or pay just a few dollars towards their content. So I can't ask my publishing institutions to pay more for everybody else to then have access to that content for free. So it's that, if you talk about that full flip, right? Well, there's enough money in the system. Well, is there? Because at some point, if an institution can get that content for free and they're having funding difficulties at the institutional level, are they going to be able to get that money to put towards a deal?
So I'll act a little bit as the counter. So I think I'm a lot more optimistic than Amy about this, but I don't think we'll be able to see a comprehensive open access. I think we'll eventually get there. I don't think we will include everything. I think we haven't adequately looked at the content that is not research content and how we're going to deal with that type of content. I think that is a large concern for societies. That's a large concern of publishers, even like SpringerNature, who has the Nature Journal, which the front list of it is not research content. We do not yet know how we will fund those activities that support those society publishers and other publications that exist out there. That is going to be really important to maintain those subscriptions and those journals. And if we don't do anything about it, those societies will not be competitive, and they will really suffer for it.
I'm probably even more optimistic than you. I think of the internet as like a big copy machine. I read a book titled Inevitable a few years ago. It was written by Kevin Kelly, and he wrote something about data wanting to be open and free. I'm not saying that it's good or bad, including green OA. I can envision, well, we might already be there in terms of openness, but it doesn't mean free. And also, I think that there is value to be made in the open world by providing additional services. It's not just the content that we need to think about, and content might be open, but there are business opportunities such as personalization, interpretation, accessibility, and so forth.
Thanks. So I'm probably middle of the road here, but I guess my answer to this is really potentially, but systems and funding to ensure quality remains needs to be evolved, and I don't think that that's something that's going to happen really quickly, and it's going to take time. But free and instantly available high-quality research would be an incredible thing to have for everyone, but we have to make sure that the business models kind of allow it to be there, and that the highly important aspect of curation for quality and importance, whether it's a journal brand or some other mechanism, can continue to exist. The unintended consequences, such as a rise in publishing output with no regard for quality, we have to watch that carefully. We don't know what that's going to look like in this environment. But I do think, just like Mihoko just said, I think there will be additional services around open content that could and will be the next wave of development.
Okay. So now let's go from, oh, I'm sorry, did I miss one?
No, can I amend?
Yes.
I want to talk, Rebecca hit on something that I wanted to, I don't want this to not happen. I would very much like to see movement move forward on this. It's just that the discussions that we are having about how to get there right now, it seems like a difficult road, but it doesn't mean that we're not willing to try things and look at things differently and move in a new direction. I also wanted to point out the fact that in the current environment, as we've been discussing, what it would mean is that subscription, articles produced via subscription, that number would need to be reduced. And we're not seeing that right now. I just did a big study with Delta Think on OhioLINK content, and it was all of our publishers. And we took a look at output. So, for example, if Springer is producing 100,000 journal articles here, when they start upticking their OA content, is that subscription number going down? And the answer is no right now. So I want to point out that that's why I have some reservations about the road forward.
So we're going to go from the crystal ball, trying to predict the future, to a very important practical and maybe intractable issue. And that is, are publishers in STEM areas approaching open access in a different manner from the way publishers in the humanities and social sciences are? Is there a bifurcation of some kind between STEM and HSS?
So I think on the case of SpringerNature is kind of a unique case because we cover all the subject areas of research. So it isn't that we're doing anything different to STEM versus HSS when we enter into transformative agreements. That isn't the case. We do take in consideration the different subject areas and the different titles when we do set APCs, because we do set them on an individual journal level. So that is taken in consideration. But I don't necessarily think this is a new thing. I think for pretty much ever, there's always been less funding when it comes to HSS. It's a reality that we've had to deal with for, the entire time that this industry has been in place. That's something that I've always heard. It's an issue. We don't necessarily do anything differently when we approach transformative agreements.
And I think the same could be said for Oxford in the transformative agreement world, but in the behind-the-scenes world of how you're planning for the transition to open access and what is it going to mean for the different kinds of publishing. And OUP also has a STEM list as well as a really, really strong humanities list. There's different implications of it. Things like really important history journals publish, I don't know how many book reviews, and that takes, an enormous amount of effort on the part of both the author community and the publisher community, and how do you continue to be able to support that kind of publishing. There was one journal that we published that they did a look at whether or not if we flipped that journal, it's a history journal, if it flips completely to open access, the journal subscription price for the largest institutions is about $700 a year. And if you took a look at all the articles that were published in the year, they don't publish that many articles, but they're really long. And they did a kind of a study about how much it would cost in APCs to replace the subscription revenue that's spread across thousands and thousands of institutions. It would be about $15,000 per APC to be able to replicate the revenue that particular society relies on to fund a lot of the amazing work that it does. So those are the kinds of considerations that we have to look at behind the scenes when trying to prepare these organizations, our society partners, for an open future.
Just add something, because it isn't just HSS and STEM. We even discuss things about the different subjects and how people write articles. So if you look at an article for a journal in the math area, those articles tend to be significantly longer than in other disciplines. So are we going to start looking at how long articles are, and should certain subject areas receive more money or less money depending on the length of the article, how much work gets put into those articles and the publication of it. It's really difficult. I think we can look at the data in a variety of ways, and it's just not easy. I don't think that everyone has thought about every single step and how we're going to move forward, but it's definitely complex.
Let's turn now to the vexed question of the for-profit versus the not-for-profit publishing entity. Do you see for-profit organizations approaching open access differently or in the same way as not-for-profit organizations?
I start. Okay, apparently I start. I've been nominated. Profits and non-profits. Just to clarify, just because a society is non-profit does not mean that it does not actually have a profit. So I think that's kind of important too. I've worked with many society publishers who are not for profit, and I've seen them have profits probably higher than some of the commercial publishers that we see out there. It's also not easy to just split publishers into profit and non-for-profit, because if you look, some of the even large publishers like SpringerNature and Wiley and Taylor and Francis, we have a tremendous amount of society journals that we publish on behalf of societies, and we do have to honor those societies. We have to take those stakeholders into consideration when we do agreements. So I wouldn't say it's all non-profit, all commercial and non-profit. That isn't a straight forward division. I think that societies have a lot more to consider, particularly because of those activities that they do for the benefit of the society and the world at large that will likely not be compensated when we move into an open access. And I think that is very different for them. And to a certain level, publishers like SpringerNature will have to consider that on behalf of the society publishers that they work with, that they partner with.
So I think something Amy touched on earlier, it isn't, I think we're mostly talking about big publishers here, but if you think about nonprofit, small societies and small organizations, the approaching it differently isn't about how they're presenting it to you, it's about what they're doing behind the scenes and how can they possibly support all of these, the requirements in the change to moving to an author pays model and the infrastructure around that. I've been at several sort of industry things, the Tipping Point, a workshop that Ivy Anderson and CDL ran in DC, and a society stood up and said, the unintended consequence of this is I cannot be independent, and I'm going to have to go to either a big commercial publisher or a big university press or some other type of organization because I don't have the infrastructure to support that publishing process change and the management of read and publish deals with every organization that we deal with. So the unintended consequence of this move coming so quickly is that we don't have the tools to be able to support it because there's a big cost around managing the author side of that process.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. It was the what came to mind for me was economies of scale, right? So for profits, I hate that term, perhaps can do things a little bit less expensive because they're doing it at such a larger scale, and at a smaller institution that can be difficult. I don't know if any of you ever heard Karen Wolf from the Omohundra Institute talk about her relationship, publishing her journal, her relationship with her authors and what that means for that organization, and that she's humanities. And it's very different than what you might see in an STM environment, but probably also very different for the mission of that organization and how that content is being produced.
Anyone else here? Great. This is an interesting segue here, but I do want to mention, you talked about the complexity, and I can just mention that when Plan S was announced, our consulting firm suddenly had more inquiries than we've ever seen before. And we've wisecracked that Plan S is a jobs program for consultants. It just because the smaller publishers were just really struggling with this. But these comments are an interesting segue into a very interesting operational question. And whether you're on the vendor side, publisher side, or on the library side, if you're trying to get into a transformative relationship with your the other party, what steps do you have to go through to make that possible?
It's so daunting. I haven't started working on it yet. But then I'm looking at our organization first now at Penn State. It's a very different environment. When I was at CDL in California, it was a system-wide office of the University of California campuses. So there were 10 campuses and CDL was in the center. And now I'm at the library institution. And I feel like I'm much closer to researchers, PhDs and assistant professors and so forth. So I have a different view. First thing that I'm thinking of doing is to look at our organization. So my portfolio includes collections, acquisitions, scholarly communications, and special collections. But then I realized, wait, I need analytics person. Where is this person? And we have library assessment, which is part of another infrastructure portfolio. So when I was at CDL, I was fortunate to be able to work with Matt Wilmot and Ivy Anderson, and they were nice enough to have this toolkit posted on their website. And I was thinking, okay, only thing I need to do is to hire a data person for me at Penn State. But when I look at the website, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I don't know. Can we do this? It's not just hiring one person, but it's very time consuming. And as a research institution, it's very likely to be very, very expensive. So I'm looking at the organization and budget. We have so many silos, small funds, and that needs to change. So I'm thinking that way. So.
Yeah, data is absolutely key, as Mihoko said. You do find yourself, moving resources into that side. People analyzing every single agreement that we even ponder. It doesn't even mean that we're going to get into an agreement with an institution. We have to look at what their output is. We have to identify. It's actually difficult to identify if someone is at the VA that's inside University of California is actually University of California affiliate or a VA affiliate. All of this takes tremendous amount of work. There's a lot of back and forth with institutions to double check, but even internally, just communication. The amount of questions that we get internally from our publishing and editorial teams just because an agreement has been reached and they don't know how that relates to their individual journal or what they can tell to the societies. Amongst about 2,000 journals that are on the Springer side, so there were Springer journals, a really large part of it are society journals. That means you're accountable to those people. You have to tell them, and you have to have systems to tell them that this is how your money is now going to trickle over. And it affects everything, not just the communication, but calculation. And while we live in a world that straddles both models, it does put a lot of pressure and there's a lot of added challenges to make sure that we can do our best. We can deliver the best for our customers without sacrificing any of that delivery. But yeah, and I'm sure there's a number of things, because I've never gone through an implementation of a transformative agreement. I'm sure there's hundreds of things that I don't even know go behind the scenes that some of my colleagues in Europe had to deal with. And I'm told that just the implementation of any agreement will take a minimum of 12 weeks. And universities need to have systems to keep track of these things as well. We need to keep track of these things. And it kind of takes a village. And I know that people seem to think that we're not moving fast enough. The reality was that we have very smart people on both sides trying to come up with solutions. They're not coming up with solutions, or they're coming up with solutions that are small steps forward, not giant leaps, because it is a complex issue. And I think we very much underestimate how much work goes into it. Some of the things that I hear my colleagues say whenever they do a transformative agreement is, we never thought this would take so long. We never thought this would take so much work. There was 100 things we hadn't thought about, and now I can't sleep at night because I'm thinking about the other 100 things that I didn't think about yet. So it is really, really complex. Resources are a key issue. Systems, operations, clarity and transparency, really, really top issues.
We have to go to questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to throw this open to some questions from the floor. Anyone have a question? And if you do, please step right up to the microphone in the front. You have to turn the microphone on.
Looks like it is on.
Tap.
Can you hear it?
We can hear you.
All right. Simple question that probably backs up Amy's hypothesis. Two of you, Maria and Mihoko, are optimistic. Rebecca's middle of the road.
I'm also middle of the road. Let me be clear. I am also middle of the road.
Okay, then I'm pessimistic. Everybody talks in Europe, Northwestern Europe anyway, about how all the money's already in the system and this is going to be cost neutral or it's going to reduce cost. Except, specifically Maria, you just said that the incredible complexity increases the timeline to implement an agreement, to figure out how to manage all the data. Universities or consortia or libraries all have to do more on their end. These costs are going to be enormous. There's a company called Kronos that's already offering to manage this kind of stuff at an enormous cost that libraries or consortia have never anticipated adding into the mix. So to me, this whole thing is kind of a, I just want to know, and my opinion doesn't matter here, I want to know your opinion. How can you be optimistic about saving libraries or consortia money? The goal of OA is laudable, I get it. That's not disputable. But the cost to do this just isn't there. We have libraries currently now who do nothing but cancel in order to get something new. Aren't you concerned that you'll lose business at SpringerNature because they're just going to go, oh, I can't afford that. I'm going to wait until it's free because I'll be a free writer and we'll let the publishing institution absorb the cost, which of course we know is not economically feasible, as my colleague Jason has pointed out. So tell me how you can be optimistic in this environment, having now cited all these reasons why it's so complex that it's going to be costly.
So my main concern is this company, because that was my idea. How dare they take that away from me? I was going to set that up. I'm optimistic because I think just like with the big deal, I think the community will come together, and I think people will eventually realize, just like what Jason said yesterday, that we have to start looking at this slightly different. And it isn't just about individuals or individual consortia. We need to be thinking about what the end game is. What everyone wants to do, which was what the session before illustrated, is that everyone seems to want to be in the same location at the end of the journey. Everyone wants open access immediate for everyone. Everyone agree with that. No one agree on how to get there, but everyone agree that that would be the perfect future. So along the way, people are going to have to realize that we have to work together. And like Jason said yesterday, it has to be collaborative. And if we're not set up in the US like countries in Europe are, where the funders and all the stakeholders come to the table together, we're going to have to set it up ourselves. We're going to have to come up with, and if we have to treat California as its own country, which I'm sure a lot of people in California would be up for that, then that's what we have to do. But I've already had institutions such as MIT talking about, we're doing this, but there's some people in the global south that do not have resources to pay for APCs. So they're trying to come up with ideas of, can we put some money aside on a fund that will allow some of these other countries and these other areas of the world to really contribute and make things possible? So I think maybe I'm naive, but I'm more trusting of the community as a whole and the fact that everyone really wants the same thing. And I think if we all want the same thing, we will figure out a way of getting there. It might not be perfect, it might not be immediate, and that's what I think is the key here, but I think we will definitely get there.
Can you define everyone?
Well, I mean literally every stakeholder, and I'm sure I will be missing quite a lot of them. I'm talking about individual institutions, and I know there will be an issue with, I mean, I have examples in certain countries. If you go to Latin America, there's certain countries who will absolutely not pay. Even when we did Scope 3, you noticed it was based on the trust that everyone who got their money back for their subscription would put it in the pot. That did not happen for everyone. The same thing what Annual Reviews is doing, they're hoping and betting on the community to pay for it and continue to pay for something that is open access. So
I want to quickly clarify, when I said I was very optimistic, I was not talking about AP-based Gold OA model. I was just talking about open world, having different copies, but not necessarily APC model.
We have another question.
Hi, Mark Watson, University of Oregon. So I'm just wondering if the panelists could think about and perhaps identify some of the players in this ecosystem that are not so happy about going to OA or may pose extreme barriers to going to OA. I was just at a session where we were talking about how if scholars are the engine of all of this, you talk to them about OA, but many of them say, well, that's not my top priority. My top priority is publishing in a journal where I can gain the respect of my peers. I was wondering this morning when I listened to the CEO of Elsevier talk if her words aligned with the wishes of the shareholders of that company. If Elsevier's profits need to drop in order to get to this wonderful place that we all want to go, are the shareholders going to agree to take less money? I don't know. Are the big research libraries in consortia willing to pay a little bit more in order to cover some of the smaller libraries? So I just wonder if you really feel like there might be some people or entities that are going to try to stop this.
I think trying to stop it versus being really, really worried about it might be two different things. I know that the American Historical Association, for example, has come out pretty publicly about how difficult this transition is going to be for that particular discipline to survive and thrive if they have to move to that environment. I talked before. The journal I was talking about before is a history journal that is supported by many, used by an enormous number of people, but the funding is just not there for them to support an author pays kind of model. You were mentioning something about studying. Sorry.
I was telling Rebecca to plug her new coworker's study, Roger Schoenfeld's study about the habits of, and this is something that came up in the panel beforehand, and we were, we're talking about the things that happen here, and the overarching challenge or concept is changing author behavior. I said the exact same thing the panel before this, changing author behavior in an economy, in a prestige economy, right? So how do you impress upon authors the want or the desire to do something like this for the greater good when they're so focused on tenure or impact factor or really contributing to their micro community, I suppose.
At Penn State, librarians are faculty members, and we go through tenure process. And I cannot tell my library faculty members to publish only on open access. And the policy says that you can publish anywhere. So our approach is to mostly focus on green OA and invest in gold OA, but crowdfunding models.
Anybody else here? I believe we are out of time, so I'd like to thank our panel for helping us out today, please. And thank you so much for coming.